We begin today the Gemara on Daf Chofala from Beis, right at the bottom of the Yamud, Tar Shema, last line of the Yamud. The Gemara here is we're in the middle of a sugya discussing the machlokes of Abaya and Rava regarding Yush Shaloi Midas. The Gemara explained what that means is an Aveda that has no simin, when the owner is going to find out that he lost it, he's going to immediately, we assume that he's going to give up on it, because how is he going to retrieve it? He has no way to prove that it's his, so he gives up on it then. But when he gives up on it, it's not then that he gives up. As soon as he finds out, so then we really know that he meant to give up the moment he lost it. It's just that now he found out about it. So Abaya says it doesn't matter. It's not a Yush until he actually is Miyayish. If you pick it up before then, you're going to have to return it. Rava says, no, Yush, even though it's Shaloi Midas, he's not yet aware that he lost it. But nevertheless, because it has no simin, so when he's miyayish, this goes back to Mafreya. This means that really from the beginning when it was lost, he was miyayish. So yish, shaloi midas, have a yish, that's already a yish from the beginning. That's the discussion here in the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara here is going to continue with Rayas on this. So the Gemara, Tashema, we learned in the Braise, Haganev, Shenotal Mizeh, V'nasan Lezeh. Haganev, he steals something, and then he gives it or sells it to someone else. Same also a gazlan shenotlo mizeh v'nosan lezeh. The difference between a ganev and a gazlan usually is a ganev is someone that comes in a hiding manner, and a gazlan is straight up front. He approaches you and he steals from you. So the gazlan as well, he stole from you and gave it to someone else. Or v'chein yarden, or similar also regarding the yarden, the river, or any river. Rashi says the town of this Braisa was living near the yarden, so he gave the example of the yarden. Which the water picked something up and they dropped it off in someone else's property. So notal, what it took, and nasan, and what it gave, and whether the water, whether the person he sold and gave it to someone else is given. So this Braisa here is based on this halacha that we learned barichas in Masechta Bava Metzia, that what you have over here is Yush, when a gazlan or a ganav steals, there is an assumption that there's Yish here, and not only the Yish, but there's also a Shini Rishus. He also gave it to someone else. So when there's a Yish and Shini Rishus, the person that received it does not have to return that item. He's kainet. Obviously, the Ganav, the Gazlan, has an obligation to pay the value, the money of this item, but what you gave, the item itself could be kept. So the Gemara explains, Bishloim Gazlan v'Yardein, the Kachaziluhu, when it's the case of a Gazlan which approached you up front, he sold it from you. Or the Yarden, you see, the Yarden comes and it floods and it takes something from your property and it takes it from someone else's property. So you see this, and therefore the person is aware of it, and therefore there's an assumption that the person is right away miyayish. So therefore we say that you're miyayish, and now someone else got it into his property. So as I mentioned, yush, and then a shini rishus. So therefore the item itself you can keep. Elo ganev, but in the case of a ganev, someone came and stole something from you, came middle of the night, dug a tunnel under your house, stole something, you're not even aware that he stole it necessarily. So how does it say there that when the ganev gave it to someone else, that then there's a yush and there's a shini rishus over here? So the ganev mika chazile de miyayish. Did he see yet that it was even stolen from him that we could say that he was miyayish? When he'll find out about it, then he'll be miyayish. So according to Abaya, that says that Yush Shaloi Midas is not Yush until he finds out about it. There's no Yush here. Rava. So this is a raya to Rava that when you find out about it, we say that retroactively he already gave up on it. So Rav Papa answers that according to Rava, you must say what it's talking about here is Belista Mezuyin. When it's talking about the Ganev wasn't someone that dug a tunnel under your house, that came and snuck and stole something from you and you weren't aware. It means a Belista Mezuyin, a person that comes an armed robber. If so, it's the same thing as the term gazlan. A gazlan is also someone that comes up front and approaches you and grabs and steals from you. It's the same thing. Why does it say ganev and gazlan? Answers the Gemara, today, gavni gazlan. When it says the term ganev and gazlan, it's two kinds of gazlanim. There's a gazlan that's not afraid. He doesn't even use any weapons. He just comes and grabs from you. That's a gazlan. A ganev is a person that's afraid of you, and therefore he comes mezuyin. He comes armed when he steals from you. That's the difference between them. But both of them are something that the person is aware of right away, and therefore he gives up right away. It's not Shaloi Midas. Tashema, the Gemara says, let's bring a rai from another Braisa. It says, Shotaf, Nohor, Kairov, Eitza, Va'avonov. If there was a flood, the river flooded over, and the person's beams, or his wood, or his stones that he had in his property got pulled in from this flood. And it took these items and it dropped it into your friend's property. Just Bavarins that it clarifies that this is not a kind of case which is like the Zutay Shal Yam, or that it was mentioned before in the Gemara. We'll have soon again. When you have the tide from the sea that comes up and pulls it back into the sea, over there we said for sure you don't have to return it. There's no din of Hashavas Aveda B'chalal in any situation. It's a limit from a pasuk. This is not this kind of a tide. This is a flood that comes and takes things from one place and it moves it to another person's property. It says the Braisa Harei Elu Shaloi. The person that the guy came into his Braisa, it says he can keep it. Why? Because the owner was Miyayish. Meaning that this is something that the owner is aware of, he sees what's going on over here, and he when such a kind of a flood happens, everybody knows about this flood. It's not something that is like something that happens as a secret. It's because the person knows about this flood, so therefore he's miyayish on the things of his property that got flooded and got moved away out of his property. So the Gemara is medayek, taimed and is yashua bailim. Seems like what the Bryce is saying is the reason why the Yish here is a Yish, that he gave up on it, that's because this is a kind of thing that is a koil about it, everybody knows, so it's midas, he knows about it and he was miyayish. Hostome. But so if so, we could understand from this, if it would be a situation which is stam, meaning it's not a situation where we know for a fact that he was miyayish, but it's a situation where there's an aveda that only afterwards the Bailam realizes, oh, he lost something that has no siman, and then he's miyayish. So then, I'm not going to say that retroactively we now say, oh, because now he found out that it got lost, so the yish of now goes back to the beginning, that even when it was shaloi midas, it would be a yish as well. You see over here that, not from the beginning, like Abaye, that in such a case where it's stam, where he didn't know about it, it wouldn't be a yish. So the Gemara answers, no, that's not how you have to be medayik from the Braisa. Hocha b'mayaskinon, over here, what's the case? Or according to Rashi, this hocha b'mayaskinon really just means the way to be medayik from this Braisa is different. When the Braisa says mipnei sha'habaylim is yashim or mipnei she'nisyashu habaylim, it doesn't mean dafke because this is something where everybody knows about this flood and therefore he definitely was miyayish. The Braisa itself is actually speaking about a case whether the person knew about it, whether the person did not know about it. There's a yish, and even if it's shalei midas, according to Ravid, the yish is a yish. But what's the diak of the Braisa? K'sheyachel lahatzel. That the Braisa is telling you that in a case where there's no simin, so whether the person knows about this flood that happened, whether the person does not know about the flood that happened, something which has no simin, and he thinks to himself, how am I going to now retrieve my pieces of wood or the stones that were on my property? These are items that have no siman to it. I'm going to go to my friend and say, here, these stones are mine, this wood is mine. It's not something you can really identify as yours. That's something that the person gives up on. But if it's something which is yachal hatzel, if it's something that he's able to retrieve, has a siman to it, or in any other way that he's able to identify it and retrieve it, in such a case, there's no yish over here because it has a siman. So the point is, according to Rava, what the Braisa is saying is, even if it was shaloi midas, this is something that it would be a yish. When we're medayik from this Braisa, that there's no yish, that's because it's something that the person is able to retrieve, has a siman or anything similar to that, so therefore there's no yish b'chlal over here. In fact, the Gemara, if that's the case, that we're saying that, and it's a case of here of yachal lahatzel, ema sefer. What does it say afterwards in the continuation of this Braisa? If when this flood is happening, the owner is coming and he's running and he's trying to save his items, then you have to return it to the owner. But the question is, if you just explained we're talking about kinds of items that has a siman and the person could retrieve it, why is it dafke if we see that this person is chasing after it? Even if he's not chasing after it as well, there should be no yish share. You should have the mitzvah of Shavas Aveda to return it to him because there's a siman and he's not miyayish on this. Answers the Gemara, we're going to have to explain it like this. The Pshat in the Braisa says, this is something that the person would be able to retrieve, but it would be with difficulty. It's maybe a siman that's not so simple for him to figure out, or it's something which is going to be very difficult for him to retrieve. So therefore we say like this. If we see that he's chasing after it when this flood happens, so then we know that he's not giving up on it. But when we see that he's not running after it, then then we're going to assume that he is being miyayish. So if it was the case that there was no siman at all, and there was no way how this person can retrieve it at all, then it doesn't make a difference if he's running after it, he's not running after it. Then we know right away that the person is definitely miyayish. If it's something where the person can definitely save it, because it has a clear simon or it's something very easy for him to save, doesn't make a difference if he's running after it or not. We know that this person is going to come and take it back. It's so easy and simple for him to take it back. This Bryce is speaking about an in-between case, where it's al yedei atchak, where with difficulty he could retrieve it, so then we could assume what this person is thinking based on if we see if he's chasing after it or not. Tashama, the Gemara says, let's bring another raya here. This is a raya not from a case of Aveda, but from the mitzvah of giving truma. So the Mishnah here says, or it's a Bryce actually, that says, how is it said that Atayrim shaloi midas trumas truma? When you give truma for someone, and it was shaloi midaita. Now the Gemara now simply understands what that means is you're separating truma from a person's produce without him appointing you or telling you to do so. So in what case will your truma take effect for this person? So you go into your friend's property, you lick it and you collect and you separate truma for him without his permission. Now, if there's a concern here that what you did, the owner is makbid, he's upset that you did this, you're stealing from him, you're doing this without his permission, then ain't truma. So then the truma you separated will not take effect. But vimlav, if after you took this truma, it's clear that the owner is okay with this, doesn't mind, then truma, then the truma will take effect. Now the Bryce explains, how can we see what the owner is thinking about what you did? How do you know if he's concerned about what you did? You stole, you separated without his permission. If the balabais comes and sees and found what you did, and he tells this person, why don't you go to better produce why don't you take from even better produce to separate for the truma? So now we say like this. How do we understand this comment that the Balabas said? What did he mean to say to this person that separated without permission when he said, why don't you go to the better ones? So now, if there are actually better produce that would be available to separate the truma from them, truma, then we take his statement literally that he was telling this person, you gave truma, well, you didn't ask me what to give truma from. Look, you give truma, it's a mitzvah, you should give from the better ones. Why didn't you take from the better ones? So we take his statement at face value, and he's actually happy that you separated the truma, and he even wanted you should give even from the better ones. So then the truma is a truma. He's not upset that you're stealing, that you're doing without his permission. But if when he tells you, why don't you take from the better ones, and it turns out there are no better ones, you took from the very best and gave the truma, then ain't truma. Then it's not going to be a truma, because then we understand his statement is sarcastic. He was like upset. You went from the better ones. You couldn't find anything better to give. You took my best produce and that you gave away for the truma. So that shows that he's upset about how you separated the truma. Now the Brayse continues, Liktoi habaylim vayisifu aleim. If the owner went and collected and he added to the truma that you gave, then ben kach truma. So then either way, whatever the expression that he said before, if there were yafis or if there wasn't, either way it's going to be truma, because we see that he's adding to what you did. So he's confirming that he's okay with what you gave, and he's even adding to it more. That's the Brayse regarding the halacha of truma. So now the Gemara asks on this like this. The Brayse says that in the case you separated truma for someone without asking the owner permission to separate this truma, but after the fact, if we see that he's happy with what you did, so then we say that it'll be a good truma. But the question is, why, if you find out after the fact that he's happy with what you did, why should it be truma? At the time when you gave the truma, this person had no idea that you're taking truma for him. And nevertheless, what do we say? If later on you find out that he's happy about it, based on the comment that he makes, we say that this now reveals his intent retroactively. Had he known when you were taking the truma that you were doing this, he would have been happy. So even though then he didn't tell you to do so, but nevertheless, we say that it reveals retroactively that he was happy with what you did then. So the Gemara is saying we should say the same thing regarding Yush. When a person's meyayish at a certain point when he finds out that he lost this item and it has no siman on it, because it has no siman, this reveals retroactively that if the moment he knows it, so it reveals that if he would have known before, he would have been meyayish before. So really the Yush shows that the Yush starts from before, just like over here, that when this person is agreeing now to your truma, it reveals that he was happy with what you did before, and therefore the truma takes effect. So the Gemara answers, Tergeme Rava alibeda Abaya. So this was a question on Abaya. So Rava himself answered for Abaya and said that we misunderstood this whole Brayse. The case over here is not that the person came in on his own. Rather, the Shavi Shliach. He was appointed as a Shliach to give this Truma. Now, if he appointed him as a Shliach, so what's the whole discussion over here? Whether the Truma you gave, whether he wants you to give this Truma, doesn't want. So we'll see, the Gemara is going to explain here. It's logical to say that the case over here is that he appointed you as a Shliach. Because if the case over here is that he did not appoint you as a Shliach to separate the Truma, would this Truma even take effect? The Torah says by the mitzvah of giving Truma, Kain tarimu gam atem trumas Hashem. And when it says this extra word of gam, what do we learn out from this? So the Torah says, "L'Rabbi is shluchachem." Gam says that you could appoint a shliach to separate the truma for you. But what we learn out from this is ma'atem l'daitachem. Just like when you separate the truma itself, it's your knowledge. You're separating it yourself. Af shluchachem l'daitachem. So too, when you're appointing a shliach, it can't be a shliach that's doing it with his own, without your awareness, and it's just doing a favor for you. It has to be a shliach, someone that you appointed. So therefore, it has to be over here. The case of this brayse must be kagoin the shav shliach, that he appointed this person as a shliach. Go separate the truma from me. If so, what's the brayse discussing? Whether the truma you separated is it a good truma, or did you steal from him? Is he happy? Is he not happy? What do you mean? Of course he's happy. He appointed you a shliach. So the Gemara explains, the case here is he told the shliach, go separate the truma from me. But he didn't tell him, take truma from this produce. He didn't specify for him exactly of which quality, of what he should take the truma. So now we say as follows. So the assumption would be, if he doesn't tell you what to take from, the assumption is, if the balabais is separating, we'll take from the average level of produce. We're not going to take from the best, not going to take from the worst, but we'll take from the average. However, this shliach went along. He took the truma without the balabais specifying this. He took from the best quality. Now the balabais comes and he finds what he did, what he decided to separate the truma. And he says, go to better ones. Why didn't you give from the better truma, from the better produce truma? So over here we say, like we explained before, if there is actually still better ones than what this person gave, then we take his statement at face value that he's honest and sincere. If not, he's just saying sarcastically, why? You took from the best, you couldn't find anything better. So therefore over here, there's no rayat to what we were discussing, because over here this is a truma midas. Okay, the Pile Mamish though, there is a discussion in Rishonim after the whole discussion here in the Gemara regarding this Truma. There still are some Rishonim that say that when you separate Truma, even without being appointed as a Shliach, and if you ended up giving from the Truma the way the Balabas wanted it, some Rishonim say that the Truma will be a Truma. Because of Zachan Laden Shlei Befonov, it's a mitzvah. The Rishonim Bechlal explained the reason why the Gemara is connecting this to our case is because by Truma, it's a mitzvah. It's not, so because it's a mitzvah, there is an assumption that after the balabas finds that you gave the truma, that he's happy that you did the mitzvah for him, because it's a mitzvah that he has to do anyways. And therefore it's similar to the case of an aveda. After you find that you lost an aveda that has no simin, there's an assumption that the yish would have been before. That's the connection to this concept of truma. But there are some Rishonim that say after the whole thing that you could give truma without being befedish appointed. But there are others that argue that the maskan of the Gemara here is that you must be befedish appointed in order to be able to give truma. The Gemara brings a story in connection to this halacha. Ameimo Mazutri v'Ravashi. These three Ameroim, Iklu lebustani the Mari bar Esek. They found themselves together in this orchard of an individual by the name of Mari bar Esek. So I see say, the worker of Mari bar Esek himself wasn't there at that point, but his worker in the field came, and he brought them tamri, v'rimayni, he brought them dates and pomegranates, and he threw it for them to eat. Ameime v'Ravashi achli. Ameime Ravashi ate from it. Mazutre lo yachol. Mazutre did not want to eat. Taisus here explains the reason why Ameime and Ravashi ate is because an artist, this worker, is a sharecropper. He gets a certain percent of the actual fruits of the property itself. So they were assuming that what he's giving them is from his share from the crop. So even if they didn't yet divide it between him and the owner, but he'll take this off, he'll deduct it from what he's supposed to get. So therefore they're eating, it's not gzeile, he's taking from his share. Adahachi, meanwhile, Asim Mari Baresik, the owner, Mari Baresik, came along. Ashkechinu, and he saw what's going on, that they're eating from the fruits of his property. So he says to his worker, why didn't you give the Chachamim from even better produce? Why are you giving them these quality of fruits? You should have given better quality fruits for them. So Amrele Yameim Ravashi Lemazutra. So Yameim Ravashi says to Mazutra now, Hashta Maila Yochel. After you hear the comment of the owner here, he's saying you should have given from better. So you see that Mari Baresik is actually happy that he gave them to eat from his fruits. So at this point, you should join us in eating also, because it is for sure no gzeil over here. So Maila Yochel Ma, why at this point aren't you eating? And then they brought this brayso that we just said. When you have the comment of this owner that a person gave truma for him without permission, so if we see that there was better produce over here, so that means that we take his comment sincerely, that he's happy that you gave this produce for truma. So over here as well, there was better fruits that this artist could have shared with them, and that means that his comment is sincere, that he's happy that he gave them the fruits. Amalahu, so Amema said that, it was Mazutra actually, the one that wasn't eating. So Mazutra said, this is what Rava said. In this case that we brought from the Truma, this kind of a comment that shows that he's happy that you gave the Truma, that was only said, over there by Truma, because it's a mitzvah, when he makes this comment, so we rely on it, that he's happy that you did the mitzvah for him. He's happy. Over here, it's possible he only said this because he was embarrassed. Really, if you would have asked him in the beginning, he wouldn't have necessarily been happy to share with these Amirayim from his fruits. But now that he saw that they're eating from it, so it doesn't pass for him to come and say, oh, why did you give them the fruits? Over here, he's being nice and he's saying, you should have taken from the better ones to give to them. But really, he was upset about the fact, it's possible that he was upset about the fact that this artist took without permission. And Ameimer held that the sharecropper that's taking over here, you can't rely on the fact that the sharecropper has a certain share of the property, and therefore he's going to deduct it from his share, the fruits that he's giving them. You can't rely on that, because maybe later on he'll forget about that. So therefore Mazutra was machmir. He says, he's not the owner of the property, I don't want to take from these fruits. And even after the owner makes the comment that it shows that he's happy, not necessarily he's happy. So therefore he's saying this kind of a comment. It's not a mitzvah, so therefore he didn't want to eat from it. Tashema, the Gemara says, let's see another raya here to this concept of Yir Shaloi Midas. And again, the Gemara brings a raya from a whole different halacha, not related to an Aveda. This halacha here talks about Tumah Benegeya to produce. The halacha is by food, by produce. In order for it to become Tumah, it has to have moisture, wet. There's designed different mashkin that if it got wet, then it becomes susceptible to Tumah. But if it was totally dry, then it's not susceptible to Tumah at all. So here, what this price is speaking about, the case where a person is putting his fruits on the rooftop, he's storing them there, and then in the night, the dew comes down and makes it moist. So the question is whether that dew that makes it moist is something which would then make it susceptible to Tumah, that is. So as we'll see in the continuation over here in the Gemara, this idea when the produce becomes wet, that it becomes susceptible to Tumah, that's only if it became wet with your agreement, with your interest, that you're happy about the fact that it became wet. But if it became wet and it's something that you didn't want and it became wet on its own, it does not become susceptible to Tumah. The Tumah, that is.
He knows the morning you can't have.
But okay, let's see how the Braisa explains this. Now, Ideyu Hatal Aleyan. If the person wakes up in the morning and you still have the wetness of the dew on it, v'sameach, and the person is happy. He's happy for the dew that's on it. Harezeh b'chiyutan. So then the pasuk, where the source of this, b'chiyutan here, the pasuk there says, chiyutan mayim al zera v'nafal nevlasam olav tamei lechem, that when there's water on your produce, then it could become tamei. So then, because you're happy about the dew that's on it, so it becomes not susceptible to tamei. Nigvo, but if after it got dry, the sun comes out and it's dried up, even if afterwards the person expresses that he's happy about the fact that it was wet before, so over here, what the pasuk says, that it has to become wet and you're happy about it, that then it would be susceptible to tumah, doesn't apply here, because when you're happy about it, it's not wet anymore. So the Gemara says, time am I. Why are we making this distinction? Why are we making the distinction when the person finds out that it was wet and when he was happy that it was wet? My love, don't you think the reason for this distinction is Mishum Deloy Amrinon? We're not going to logically say that Kivin the Igloi Milsa Hashte, That ninichale may karanami nichale. We're not going to say that if he finds out afterwards that it was wet with the dew, that means that really when it was wet, that's when he was really happy about it. He has to have the actual awareness to see that it's wet, and then he's happy, in order for this to be considered that it became wet with his interest, with his agreement. But if he finds out about it afterwards, and then we're not going to say, retroactively he was happy then. No. So therefore, we should say the same thing regarding Yush. When you find out about Aveda and you're miyayish, then we shouldn't say that Yush Shalom Midas have a Yish, that it reveals retroactively that he was really miyayish from before, the moment he lost it. What it says, you can't compare the case of Metzia, Yush, to this halacha of the tumah that it becomes susceptible to tumah by the wetness. Why? Because Shani Hasam, because there it's based on the pasuk. And what does the pasuk say? The chsiv ki yitain. Even though the nekudis, the Messiah of where you read it is kiyutan, but the actual ksiv, it's written without a vav. So you read it as kiyitain, which means ad she yitain, until you physically put the water on your produce. So therefore, it has to be something that's b'shas ma'aseh, you're aware and you're happy about it. If you find out about it later, it's too late. So the Gemara right away asks, if that's the case, hihachi reish nami. If so, in the first case of the Braisa, where you didn't place the dew on the produce, the dew came down, and you just found out about it, and you're happy about it. So over there as well, it should not be ki yitain that you put the water on this produce. Answers the Gemara, Hasam K'der Rav Papa. There, Rav Papa already explained this, that even though it says it could be read as ki yitain, but it doesn't mean you physically have to put the water on it. What did Rav Papa explain? Rav Papa Rami. Rav Papa said that we can ask that the way you read the pasuk with the nekudis and the way it's written without a vav, without the nekudis, so he says ksiv ki yitain. The ksiv is, it says without a vav, so you read it ki yitain. But the karinon ki yutan. The Messiah is that we read it as ki yutan, which means two different things. Kiyita means you physically are placing the water. Yutan means it got placed there without you. So, but there's two different mashmasan over here. So how do we resolve this? How do we understand what is the Torah saying here? Be'inon ki yutan dum yedichiyitein. You don't have to place the water on it, but if the water goes on it, but it has to be similar to like a case where you put the water there. What does that mean? Ma yiten ledas. Just like when you put the water there, it's with your awareness that you're doing the action and you're putting it there. Av ki yutan am ledas. So too when the water goes over here, in this case, the dew has to be with your awareness. Only then it becomes susceptible to tumah. So therefore, in the Reisha, when you actually have the person's awareness, b'shas it's wet with the dew, then it becomes susceptible to tumah. But if you find out about it afterwards, it's not similar kiyite, and you don't have your actual das, b'shas it was wet. So therefore, it does not become susceptible to tumah. So it's all different halacha. We can't learn from there the halacha of Yush by an Aveda. Now the final raya that the Gemara brings, and this is actually a raya to Abaye's opinion. Toshama, the Gemara says the raya is like this: the Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel ben Yitzadik. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shmuel ben Yitzadik, Minayin la Aveda sheshat v'no. Going back to this halacha that was mentioned in the beginning of this sugya on Chaf Aleph, when you have an Aveda that was washed away by the flood of a river, shei muteres. How do we know that this is something which is mutter? So here we're talking about similar to, this is the two things that they always brought together. Zuter shalyam, when you have a tide that then pulls things in and it pulls it all the way out into the depth of the sea. And the same thing, we're talking about a major flood that pulls it out into the river. Now, not like we spoke before about a flood that takes us from one property to another. A big flood that pulls it all the way out. In such a case, how do we know that if then you find this Aveda Shimateres, that it's totally mutter? Because the pasuk says regarding an aveda, the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, the pasuk says v'chein tasel l'chamayra, v'chein tasel l'simlosa. You find someone's donkey or shirt, v'chein tasel l'chol aveda sachicha, or to any of a lost item of your friend, asher toivad mimenu, which is lost from him, from your friend, umitzasa, and you found it. So what do we learn out from the language of the pasuk here? Mi she'avuda heimenu. That when is there a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, if it's lost from that individual, the owner, umitsuya etzukaladam, but it's available for anyone else to find it, then there's a mitzvah. Yatzisizu sha'avuda mimenu ve'eni mitsuya etzukaladam. Over here, though, this case is excluded because the case when the river or the sea washes it away, so it's lost from anybody. It's something that goes out into the depths of the sea and it's not available for anybody to access. And then later on, if the sea washes back up onto the shore, so then anybody can take it and keep it. That's what we learn out from this pasuk. So now the pasuk says there's two parts to this pasuk. There's what the pasuk says, and then there's the diak of the pasuk. What the pasuk is actually saying is the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. In a case when it's available for anybody to find, and the owner lost it, then you have to return it. Then there's the diak of the pasuk, when it's not available for anybody because it got washed away. And then the pasuk is saying that it's mutter for everyone. So the Gemara now is going to compare these two. The isura, the case where it's aser, meaning in the case where you're not allowed to keep it, where there still is the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, domye dehatera. We compare it to what the pasuk itself is actually saying. Sorry, we compare it, that is, to the diak of the pasuk. We compare it to the diak of the pasuk, which is the case where there's a heter when nobody has access to it, and therefore you're allowed to keep it. What's the comparison? Ma hetere, just like when the pasuk gives the heter, when something gets washed away by the tide of the sea. Bein the isba simin, bein the lesba simin shara. What the Torah is saying is, it doesn't matter if it has a simin or not. Once it gets washed away into the sea, it's not available for anyone to access in that situation, so therefore it's totally mutter. Afisura, so too in the pasuk itself, when it's saying the iser, when it's saying that you're not allowed to keep it, and you have the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, so this mitzvah is bein the isba simin or bein the lesba simin. Asura. When you find an Aveda, whether it has a simin, whether it does not have a simin, it's going to be asa for you to keep. Why? What does you see from here? To Yofta de Rava, this refutes what Rava says, because over here you see whether it has a simin, whether it doesn't have a simin, you have the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Unless you clearly hear that the Balabas says, Vaile l'chasarin kis, he's clearly miyayish. And you're not going to make a distinction and say, by an Aveda that has no simin, there's already an assumption of Shaloi Midas that he would be miyayish. As soon as he finds out he was miyayish, so we say retroactively he was miyayish. No, we don't make that distinction. Just like by an Aveda that has a simin, only when he's miyayish is it a yish. So too by an Aveda that has no simin, only when he's miyayish is it a yish. Before that it's not a yish. Just like regarding the case of hetera, by zute shal yam, by shlisa shal nar, it's mutter, regardless if it has or doesn't have a simin. So we're comparing and saying it's the same thing also regarding a case which you have to return it, that you always have to return it, regardless if it does or doesn't have a simin, unless you hear that he's beferish miyayish. This is Rashi's shot in the Gemara. There are other Rishonim that have a different shot in the Gemara, but Rashi learns here that the point is we're making a hekish between what it says in the pasuk and the diak of the pasuk, that they're both the same kind of a case. So this refutes what Rava says, and the Gemara concludes to Yufta. This is a refutation of Rava's opinion, and therefore v'hilchase kavasei the Abaye, we paskin like Abaye that says that Yush Shaloi Midas is not Yush, and the Gemara says biyal kagam. We paskin like Abaye in 6 cases. Otherwise, the halacha in Shas is always like Rava, but there are 6 cases that the halacha is like Abaye, and this is the first one actually from the Yal Kagam. The Yud is Yush Shaloi Midas. And Rashi brings the other cases as well. Some of them we learned already before in other Masechtas, but this is one of the exceptions. Amalei Ravache bereded Avalei Ravashi. So Ravache says to Ravashi based on this, V'chime acha de taste of Rava. So now we see that Rava's opinion was refuted. Hani Tmari de Zike, these dates that the wind blows them off the tree and they fall, and people find them and people eat from them, even though they're coming from trees, from private properties. How could we eat from there? Even if you're going to say that once the owner finds out about it, he's going to be miyayish, but we just paskin like Abaye that says Yush Shaloi Midas is not a Yush. That's the pshat that Taisa says in the Rishonim here say. Rashi actually adds to this that when the Gemara is asking this question, it's not even necessarily a question on what we just said that the halacha is like Abaye, because we're talking over here about dates that come off a tree, and we had already this point in the end of the Chaf Aleph where you can recognize that these dates come from this tree. So everybody would agree over here, even Rava would agree over here, that there is no yish here. There's a siman. You see clearly it comes from this tree. The Gemara is asking the question over here. It's being mechazik the question. Even if it wouldn't have a siman, it shouldn't be mutter either, because we just paskin like Abaye, that it's not a yush. For sure, these dates, that you can clearly see it came from this tree, how are people eating from it? Amalei, so Rav Ashi answered, what happens over here is, in the case that we see that people eat from these dates, the reason is because there's all kinds of creeping and crawling creatures that come and eat from it. The owner in the beginning, it's a yish that he gives up any of these dates that fly off his tree. He's not interested in them from the chatchila. So therefore there's a yish right from the beginning, and therefore anybody can go and eat it. The Gemara, that's if you have an owner that's a bardas, that's a gadol, that we could say that he's l'chatchila miyayish from this. But how about yasmi? You have orchards, you have trees, And it could be amongst those trees, maybe someone that's a yasim, and he's a cotton, and he doesn't have any das b'chlal, and therefore there's no union of yish over there. So how could you say over there, by a child, there is no such a thing of yish, there's no such a thing that he could be mafkes something, he doesn't have any das b'chlal for this. So how are we allowed to eat those dates that fly from these properties, that there might be a yasim there as well? Amalei, so he answered him, Bage ba'ara de yasmi loy machaskinon. When you have a bage, when you have a big valley, and there's many different properties, and there's a lot of different trees there, so the majority of it is not owned by someone which is a yasim. The majority of it is owned by people that are miyayish and are mafkirit, and there's a clear assumption that he's definitely mafkir, and therefore we're allowed to eat from these dates. So which basically the Gemara is saying is that we follow the Raiv. Usually by Mamonis, we don't follow the Raiv. Some of Farshim say that over here the kavan of the Gemara is that it's not just a Raiv, but it's basically a sfek, because the Gemara was asking in a case where we don't know for a fact that there is a yasim that owns one of the properties there. Maybe there's a yasim, maybe there's not, and maybe it flew off of his tree and maybe it didn't. So in such a case, we say that there's no concern about that. But the Gemara now says, however, muchzik v'oimed mai. How about if you know for a fact that this date that fell here came from the property of a yasim? Or karchasa mai. How about if it's a date that falls from a tree, which is not a situation where there's shkotzim or a mosim there. It's protected. It has this fence around it, and it's protected. And when the dates fall down, it's something which does not become despicable. The owner could still use it. Amalei asira. So Rashi says, you're right. In such a case, it will be us to eat from those dates. Okay, going back now to what it said in the Mishnah. Kiricha is b'reshus harabim arei l'shaloi. The Mishnah said that if you find bundles of wheat in the reshus harabim, so then you can keep it. What's the reason for this? The Gemara has two pshatim. Omar Rabbe, so Rabbe says, v'afilu b'dava sheyesh by siman. What it's talking about is even bundles that do have a clear siman on it, but if it's found in the reshus harabim, it doesn't matter. You can keep it. Why is that? So the Gemara explains, Alme kasava Rabbe. We see that Rabbe is of the opinion, siman ha'asi lidares le'ave siman. Something that had a siman, but it could get stepped upon, and therefore the siman will be removed. That's not a siman that the owner relies upon. The owner is going to expect that this siman is going to be removed, and therefore he's miyayish from this. Rav Amar, however, Rav says no. Lo yishanu ala b'dav she'en b'siman. When it says in the Mishnah you find these bundles on the Shus Rabim that you're allowed to keep it, that's because it was bundles without a siman. Ava b'dav she'yesh b'siman. If it had a siman on it, chayiv la'achris. You have to announce it and return it. Alma, we see Kasava Rava's opinion is simin ha'asi lidares have a simin. When something has a simin, even if it could get easily stepped on and the simin would be removed, it's still a simin. The owner, the assumption is the owner is still relying on that simin. Others, when they brought this machlokes of Rava and Rabbe, they taught it separately, not as a interpretation of our Mishnah, but stam. They brought that they were argued about this subject. Simin ha'asi lidares. A siman which can get stepped upon and the siman could be removed. Rabba Ama lo have a siman. Rabba says that's not a valid siman. Rava Ama have a siman. And Rava says it is a siman. So now the Gemara says, let's see, based on what it says in our Mishnah and in the next Mishnah about this. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Kiricha is b'reshus harabim. If you find these bundles of wheat in the reshus harabim, harei l'shaloi. So then you can keep it. Then the next Mishnah, this is later on, the Mishnah says, B'reshus HaYachid. If you find bundles of wheat in the Reshus HaYachid, Leitul HaMachris. So because it's in the Reshus HaYachid, you have to go and return it. So the Gemara says like this, Hey Chidami, what kind of bundles are we talking about? Either lesbo simin, are we talking about bundles that have no simin? So then b'reshus hayachid my machres. Why are we making a distinction where you found it? Whether reshus harabim, whether reshus hayachid. If it has no simin, why are you returning it? Why are you calling out? The owner has no way to identify it, so you can't return it. Elalav, the isbo simin. It must be that this distinction of reshus hayachid to the reshus harabim is talking about bundles that have a simin. Ve'katani, and it says b'reshus harabim arei l'shaloi. That if it's found in the reshus harabim, even though it has a simin, you can keep it. So I see simin asil lidaris, that if it's a simin that is people step on it and it can go off, lo have a simin, it's not a good simin. So therefore we see like whose opinion was this Rabba. We see like Rabba over here in this this refutes Rabba's opinion that says that even if it could be stepped upon, it's still a good simin. So the one answer is no. Amalach Rava will tell you loilam the lesbu simin. Really, the case over here is these bundles we're talking about, and there's a distinction where it's found, whether it's Reshus HaYachid or Reshus HaRabim. Really, it does not have a siman. If so, how are you making a distinction? But Reshus HaYachid, my machris. If he found in the Reshus HaYachid, what is he returning? What is he calling out to return? It has no siman. So the Gemara says, Machriz Mokoim. What he calls out is the place where it's found. There's two pshatim in this. Rashi says the pshat for this is, he's going to call out and say, in this and this location, I found something. And he doesn't say what he found. And the owner comes along and says, yes, I lost this and this item in this location. And the fact that he identifies what the item is that was found in that location, that's a simon. That's the Rashi's pshat. Other Rishonim say the pshat over here is, no, he's machriz, I found this and this item. And he doesn't give the location. If the owner comes and gives the location, that's a good simon that we know that it's his. That was Rava's answer. But for Rabba will tell you can't learn the pshat of the Mishnah this way, because Mokoim lo have a simon. Just locating the place where it was found, whether according to Rashi's pshat, whether according to the Rishonim pshat, to say that, now that we see that it's this item in this location, that there's an assumption that there was only one such item found in this location, and there was no second item like this in this location, that's not strong enough of a proof, that's not strong enough of a simon. And the Gemara here brings that Rava and Rabba argued about this as well. The Itma, as we learned, Makkah, regarding the location of where something is found, Rabba lo have a simon, Rabba says that it's not a simon, and Rava have a simon, and Rava says that it is a simon. Okay, we'll see the continuation, the Gemara gets into this conversation as well. Okay.